I opened my retirement account statement and saw a $340,000 withdrawal I never made. The signature looked like mine, but I knew I'd never signed anything. Then I saw the beneficiary name, my own son, Marcus. That's when I realized the boy I raised had just stolen my entire future, but he had no idea his retired teacher mother was about to give him the education of his lifetime. Before we start, don't forget to like this video, comment where you're watching from, and hit that subscribe button so you never miss a story like this. Have you experienced something like this? Please let me know in the comments. My name is Mary Rodriguez. I'm 67 years old, and I live in Portland, Oregon. And this is the story of how I discovered my son was a thief and taught him the most expensive lesson of his life. It was a rainy Tuesday morning in November when my world collapsed like a house of cards. I was sitting at my kitchen table with my steaming coffee, wearing my favorite lavender robe, going through the monthly statements that had arrived in yesterday's mail. The kitchen smelled like cinnamon toast and Earl Grey tea, the same breakfast ritual I'd maintained for the past 5 years since retiring from teaching. 43 years of teaching kindergarten through 5th grade had taught me to be meticulous about paperwork, so I always reviewed every document carefully, using the same red pen I'd once used to grade spelling tests. The morning light filtered through my lace curtains, casting delicate shadows across the stack of envelopes, and I remember thinking how peaceful everything felt before my world shattered into a million pieces. The envelope from First National Bank felt thicker than usual, heavier somehow, like it was carrying the weight of bad news. When I opened it with my mother's old silver letter opener, the same one she'd used for 60 years, I expected to see my retirement balance growing steadily, just like it had for the past 4 decades. My coffee was still warm in my hands when I saw the number that made my entire body go cold. Account balance, $2,847.33. The numbers seemed to dance on the page, mocking me, taunting me with their impossibility. 3 months ago, that same account had held $343,421, money I'd saved dollar by dollar, skipping vacations to Disney World when Marcus was young, buying generic groceries instead of name brands, mending clothes instead of buying new ones. My life savings, 4 decades of careful budgeting, brown bag lunches, and saying no to myself 1,000 times so I could say yes to my future. Gone. My hands shook so violently that I had to set my coffee cup down before I dropped it. The ceramic mug, a gift from my students that read "World's Best Teacher," seemed to mock me now. How could the world's best teacher be so stupid? I flipped to the transaction history with trembling fingers, each page revealing more devastating details. There it was, printed in cold corporate font, November 3rd, a withdrawal of $340,000, authorized by electronic signature. The memo line read, "Investment Transfer, Cryptocurrency Venture Capital Fund." I stared at those words until they blurred, reading them over and over, hoping they would somehow change or disappear. I had never heard of any cryptocurrency fund. I barely knew how to use my smartphone beyond making calls and sending texts, let alone invest in digital currencies that I didn't understand. But someone had used my account, my signature, my money, my trust. Then I saw the receiving account information, and my heart stopped beating for what felt like an eternity. The account holder's name made my blood run cold and my stomach twist into knots. Marcus Rodriguez. My son, my only child. The boy I raised alone after his father abandoned us when Marcus was 8 years old, leaving me with nothing but a stack of unpaid bills and a broken heart. The same son I'd worked double shifts tutoring neighborhood kids to pay for his college education, who I'd sacrificed everything for, who I'd loved unconditionally through every mistake and misstep. He had taken everything from me, and the worst part was that he'd made me an unwilling accomplice by using my own signature, my own identity, to destroy my own future. I sat in my car outside the bank for almost an hour, just breathing, trying to process what I'd discovered. The rain drummed against my windshield like angry fingers, matching the rhythm of my racing heart. Marcus was my only child, my pride and joy, the boy I'd raised alone after his father left when he was 8. I'd worked double shifts tutoring after school to pay for his college, sold my mother's jewelry to buy him a car for graduation, given him everything I had, and apparently that still wasn't enough. The betrayal cut deeper than any physical pain I'd ever experienced, deeper than the loneliness after his father left, deeper than the exhaustion of working 3 jobs to keep us afloat. This was my own flesh and blood, the baby I'd rocked to sleep, the toddler whose scraped knees I'd kissed, the teenager whose broken heart I'd mended. Now he had broken mine beyond repair. Inside the bank, the familiar marble floors and mahogany furniture that had once felt welcoming now felt cold and sterile. Karen Williams, my account manager for the past 15 years, looked genuinely confused when I showed her the statement. Her usually perfectly styled blonde hair was slightly disheveled, and her reading glasses perched on the end of her nose as she studied the papers with growing concern. "Mrs. Rodriguez, you were here last Tuesday," she said, her voice filled with confusion and a hint of concern. "You said you wanted to help your son with his business venture. You seemed so excited about it, talking about how proud you were of his entrepreneurial spirit. You even brought in photos of his new car." I stared at her, feeling like I was living in some alternate reality where nothing made sense anymore. "Karen, I haven't been in this bank since September when I deposited my pension check, and I certainly didn't authorize any transfer. And I definitely don't have any photos of Marcus's car because I didn't know he had a new one." The confusion in her eyes deepened, and I could see her trying to reconcile what she remembered with what I was telling her. "Are you absolutely certain it was me? Because I'm telling you right now, I was at Dr. Peterson's office getting my teeth cleaned last Tuesday. I have the appointment card in my purse if you need proof." Karen's face went pale as she pulled up the security footage on her computer, and what I saw made my stomach turn and my heart break all over again. There was a woman who looked like me, wearing my favorite blue cardigan that I'd bought at JCPenney 10 years ago, and my reading glasses with the small scratch on the left lens. The woman had my hair color, my approximate height and build, but when she turned toward the camera, I could see it clearly. It was Marcus, my own son, dressed as me, wearing a gray wig styled exactly like my hair, makeup carefully applied to age his face, perfectly mimicking my mannerisms and even the way I held my purse against my side. The transformation was so complete, so detailed, that it was obviously planned for weeks, maybe months. He had studied me, learned my habits, practiced my signature, and prepared for this deception with the same attention to detail I'd once praised him for in school projects. "He even wore my perfume," I whispered, recognizing the way the teller had smiled when I approached the counter, the same warm smile Sarah always gave me because she loved the lavender scent I'd worn for 20 years. He planned this whole thing. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision or a desperate mistake. This was calculated, premeditated theft. Karen's face went white as she realized the implications, her hand flying to her mouth in shock. "Mrs. Rodriguez, this is fraud of the highest degree. Identity theft, forgery, elder abuse. We need to call the police immediately and report this to our fraud department." But I held up my hand, surprising myself with how calm my voice sounded despite the storm raging inside me. "Not yet, Karen. First, I need to understand exactly what Marcus has done with my money and how extensive this deception goes. Then I'll decide how to handle my son. This is a family matter that's become a legal matter, but I want to be sure I have all the facts before I make any irreversible decisions." That evening, I did something I'd never done before in my entire life. I became a detective, a digital forensics expert, a financial investigator. I pulled out my laptop, the same one Marcus had helped me buy 3 years ago for keeping in touch with friends and online shopping, and started researching everything I could about cryptocurrency investments, digital fraud, and most importantly, how to track stolen money through the labyrinth of online transactions. My dining room table became mission control, covered with printed articles, handwritten notes, and multiple notebooks as I tried to understand this new world of digital currency that my son had used to steal my future. I called my neighbor's son, David Kim, who worked in tech for one of Portland's many startups and had always been kind to me, helping with computer problems and explaining technology in ways I could understand. When he arrived at my door that evening, his usual cheerful demeanor changed to serious concern as I explained what had happened. "Mrs. Rodriguez, if your son transferred money to crypto accounts, there might be a digital trail. These transactions are recorded on something called a blockchain, which is essentially a public ledger. It's actually very traceable if you know what you're looking for, unlike what most people think about cryptocurrency being untraceable." David came over with his laptop and several external monitors, transforming my quiet kitchen into a high-tech investigation center. We spent the next 4 hours diving deep into the digital world, and what we found was so much worse than I'd imagined. My $340,000 hadn't gone to any legitimate investment or business venture like Marcus had told the bank. Instead, he had used my life savings to fund a lifestyle of luxury and excess that made my modest retirement seem pathetic by comparison. Over the past 3 weeks since the theft, he had spent my money like it was monopoly money, with no regard for the decades of sacrifice it represented. The spending breakdown was nauseating. $45,000 on a brand new Tesla Model S in midnight blue with every luxury option available. $30,000 on luxury hotel stays in Las Vegas and Miami, including penthouse suites and room service bills that exceeded my monthly grocery budget. $25,000 on designer clothes and jewelry from brands I'd only seen in magazines. $40,000 on gambling and casino losses that showed he'd been living like a high roller while I'd been clipping coupons. And $90,000 on something called leveraged crypto trading that had lost 80% of its value in just 2 weeks. The remaining $110,000 was sitting in his personal checking account, probably waiting to be squandered on his next impulsive purchase. "He's not investing your money, Mrs. Rodriguez," David said quietly, his voice filled with disgust and sympathy. "He's just spending it like it's his inheritance, except you're still alive and he stole it. And the crypto trading he did, those are essentially gambling bets with extremely high risk that went wrong, just like everything else he's done with your money." I sat back in my chair, feeling something fundamental shift inside me, like a tectonic plate moving deep beneath the surface. The grief was still there, the heartbreak and betrayal, but it was being replaced by something colder and more focused: anger. Pure, righteous anger at the injustice of it all. Marcus called me the next morning at exactly 9:15 a.m., just like he did every Wednesday, his voice cheerful and casual, as if he hadn't just committed the most devastating betrayal imaginable against his own mother. "Hey, Mom, how are you doing? I was thinking of stopping by this weekend. Maybe we could go to that new brunch place downtown, My Treat." The casual way he said "my treat" made my stomach turn, knowing that any treat he offered was being paid for with my stolen money, my decades of sacrifice and careful saving. I kept my voice steady, drawing on every ounce of acting ability I'd developed during 43 years of dealing with difficult parents and administrators. "That would be nice, sweetheart. Actually, I have some exciting news to share with you about an investment opportunity I've been learning about." There was a pause on the other end of the line, just long enough for me to hear the change in his breathing, the slight tension that crept into his voice when he thought he might be caught. "Oh, what kind of investment, Mom? You've never been interested in anything like that before." His attempt to sound casual failed miserably, and I could practically hear the gears turning in his head as he tried to figure out how much I knew and whether his carefully constructed deception was beginning to unravel. "Well, I've been learning about cryptocurrency of all things. It sounds absolutely fascinating, all these digital currencies and blockchain technology. Maybe you could help me understand it better. You always were so good with technology, even as a little boy. Remember how you taught me to use email when you were in high school?" I let a note of maternal pride creep into my voice, the same tone I'd used when he was young, and I was genuinely proud of his accomplishments before he became a thief who stole from his own mother. Another pause, longer this time, and I could almost see him calculating how to respond, whether to maintain his innocent facade or start preparing his excuses. "Sure, Mom, I'd be happy to help you understand crypto. It can be pretty complicated, but I know a bit about it." We arranged to meet for dinner on Friday at his favorite restaurant, Ringside Steakhouse, an expensive establishment downtown that I'd never been able to afford on my teacher's salary and pension. Now I knew how he could afford to eat there regularly, how he could casually suggest it without even thinking about the cost. Every luxury in his life was built on my suffering, my sacrifice, my stolen future. After hanging up, I made several more phone calls that would change both our lives forever. First, to my lawyer, Helen Morrison, who'd handled my divorce 20 years ago and had always told me to call if I ever needed help. Her voice was warm, but became deadly serious when I explained the situation. Then to Karen at the bank to formally report the fraud and start the paper trail that would be necessary for prosecution. Finally, to Detective Sarah Chen at Portland Police Department, who specialized in financial crimes and elder abuse cases. Mrs. Rodriguez, the fact that he impersonated you makes this a felony on multiple levels, Detective Chen explained, her voice professional but sympathetic. Identity theft, wire fraud, elder abuse, forgery, the charges could add up to decades in prison. But if you want to handle this privately first and try to recover the money through family channels, we can hold off on the arrest warrant for a reasonable amount of time. Just be very careful, document everything, and don't let him know you're onto him until you're ready. People who commit this level of fraud against family members can become desperate and unpredictable when they're cornered. Friday evening arrived gray and drizzly, typical November weather in Portland that matched my mood perfectly. I arrived at Ringside Steakhouse wearing my best dress, the navy blue one I'd bought for my retirement party, and my late mother's pearl necklace that had been passed down through 3 generations of women who had never imagined their legacy would be stolen by their own descendants. The restaurant was exactly as expensive and intimidating as I'd expected, with dark wood paneling, leather banquettes, and prices that made my pension seem inadequate. Marcus was already there, sitting at a corner table, wearing a charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget, and a watch that gleamed gold in the dim lighting. He stood to hug me, and for a moment I felt like I was looking at a complete stranger wearing my son's face. This wasn't the boy who used to help me grade papers on Sunday afternoons, who cried when I couldn't afford to buy him name-brand sneakers for school, who had once been so proud of his scholarship to Portland State that he'd called me 3 times in one day to make sure it was real. This was a man who had looked me in the eye for months while planning to steal my future, who had hugged me while calculating how to destroy my security, who had smiled at me while practicing my signature in preparation for his elaborate deception. "You look beautiful tonight, Mom. I love that necklace on you. It really brings out your eyes." The compliment that should have warmed my heart instead made me feel sick, because I knew he was probably calculating its value, wondering if it was something else he could eventually steal or manipulate me into giving him. "Thank you, sweetheart. It was your grandmother's and her grandmother's before that. Someday it'll be yours, assuming I have anything left to pass down to someone who deserves it." I paused deliberately, watching his face for any reaction to my loaded words, but he was still maintaining his facade of innocent concern. I pulled out my phone and opened the recording app that David had shown me how to use, placing it on the table between us like it was just another part of the place setting. "Well, I've been thinking a lot about what you said regarding cryptocurrency. I decided to do some research, and I even checked my retirement account to see if I had enough money to make a serious investment." His fork stopped halfway to his mouth, and I saw the first crack in his carefully maintained composure. "What did you find out, Mom?" "I found out that someone already made that cryptocurrency investment for me. Isn't that interesting? $340,000 gone from my account, transferred to something called a venture capital fund. The bank said I authorized it myself, even showed me security footage of me signing the papers." I kept my voice conversational, almost casual, as if we were discussing the weather rather than the destruction of my life's work. Marcus set down his fork carefully, his hands trembling slightly, and I could see him calculating his options, trying to decide whether to maintain his lie or start preparing his defense. "Mom, I think there might be some mistake." "No mistake, Marcus. The bank showed me the security footage very clearly. You wore my blue cardigan, the one I bought at JCPenney that you always said made me look elegant. You wore a wig styled exactly like my hair, makeup to age your face, even my reading glasses with the little scratch on the left lens. You studied my mannerisms, practiced my signature, and planned this theft for weeks or maybe months." My voice stayed calm and level, drawing on decades of experience dealing with lying children, but inside I was trembling with rage and heartbreak. He looked around the restaurant nervously, probably calculating whether anyone was listening to our conversation, whether he could somehow talk his way out of this, or if his elaborate deception had finally collapsed completely. "Mom, let me explain what happened." "Explain what exactly? How you've been lying to me for months while planning to steal my life savings? How you dressed up like your own mother to commit fraud against the woman who sacrificed everything to raise you? Or maybe you want to explain that Tesla parked outside, the one that cost $45,000 of my money I saved by eating canned soup and wearing the same clothes for years." Each word came out sharper than the last, and I could see other diners starting to glance in our direction, but I didn't care anymore about maintaining appearances or protecting his reputation. His face went pale, all the blood draining away, as he realized that I knew everything, that his careful deception had been completely unraveled. How did you find out about the car? How do you know how much everything cost? Because unlike you, Marcus, I'm not stupid. I'm a teacher who spent 43 years dealing with children who thought they could lie to me and get away with it. I learned how to track digital transactions, cryptocurrency transfers, bank records, even casino losses. I know about Vegas. I know about Miami. I know about every dollar you've stolen and squandered while I've been living on Social Security and eating generic food to stretch my pension. Marcus tried to leave the table, probably planning to walk away from this confrontation like he'd walked away from responsibility his entire adult life, but I grabbed his wrist with a strength that surprised both of us. Sit down. We're going to finish this conversation right here, right now, because this might be the last conversation we ever have as mother and son. He slumped back into his chair like a deflated balloon, and for the first time since he was a child caught in a lie, I saw him cry real tears. Not the manipulative crocodile tears he'd used as a teenager to get out of trouble or guilt me into giving him money, but genuine tears of shame and fear as the full weight of his actions finally hit him. I never meant for it to go this far, Mom. I just needed some startup money to get my cryptocurrency business off the ground, and I was going to pay you back when my investments paid off. I thought I could double or triple your money and surprise you with the profits. Your investments? You mean your gambling addiction. I know about Vegas, Marcus. I know about the $40,000 you lost at the blackjack tables and slot machines. I know about Miami, the penthouse suite, the room service bills that cost more than my monthly grocery budget. I know about every single dollar you've spent living like a millionaire while your mother ate ramen noodles for dinner. Each revelation hit him like a physical blow, and I could see him shrinking smaller and smaller as the full scope of his deception was laid bare. His face crumpled as the facade finally collapsed completely. How could you possibly know all that? I was so careful to keep everything separate to make sure you'd never find out until I could pay everything back with interest. Because I spent the last 3 days becoming an expert on cryptocurrency, digital transactions, and financial fraud. Do you know what I discovered about your so-called investments? You turned my retirement fund into your personal ATM machine. You didn't invest my money in any business venture or cryptocurrency fund. You spent it on toys and vacations and gambling while I've been clipping coupons and buying generic groceries to stretch my pension until my next Social Security check. I can pay you back, Mom. The crypto markets are volatile, but they always recover eventually. Just give me some time and I can make this right. The desperation in his voice was pathetic, the same wheedling tone he'd used as a child when he'd broken something and was trying to avoid punishment. With what money? The crypto trading account that's down 80% and continuing to fall? The checking account with $110,000 left, which is less than a third of what you stole? Marcus, you took $340,000 and you have maybe 15% of it left. The rest is gone forever, spent on a lifestyle you never earned and never deserved. I leaned forward across the table, my voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more threat than shouting ever could. Here's what's going to happen. Tomorrow morning, you're going to return every penny you still have access to. The Tesla gets sold immediately, the jewelry gets pawned, every luxury item you bought with my stolen money gets liquidated. And then you're going to sign a confession and a repayment agreement that my lawyer has prepared. And if I refuse, what are you going to do? Disown me? Cut me out of your will? The arrogance was still there, buried under the fear and shame, the entitled belief that he could still manipulate me with emotional blackmail. I smiled, the same cold smile I used to use when a particularly difficult student was testing my patience and about to learn a hard lesson about consequences. If you refuse, Detective Chen executes the arrest warrant I helped her prepare this afternoon. Identity theft, wire fraud, elder abuse, Forgery? The charges add up to somewhere between 15 and 20 years in federal prison. You want to roll those dice, Marcus? You want to gamble with your freedom the same way you gambled with my retirement? Marcus tried to negotiate, to bargain, to promise he'd changed and learned his lesson, but I was done being the forgiving mother who enabled his irresponsible behavior. I'd spent 35 years making excuses for him, bailing him out of trouble, believing his promises to do better, and look where it had gotten me. My life savings stolen by my own son while I lived on Social Security and generic soup. I gave him exactly 24 hours to begin returning my money, transfer the liquid assets, and provide a written confession, and I meant every word of that deadline. The next morning, my phone rang at 7:03 a.m., Marcus's name appearing on the caller ID like a bad omen. His voice was hoarse from crying, filled with the kind of desperation that comes from finally understanding that actions have consequences. "Mom, I can't sell the car that fast. The Tesla dealership says it'll take at least a week to process everything, and the crypto accounts are frozen because of pending fraud investigations that the exchange initiated automatically." "That's not my problem, Marcus. You have until noon today to transfer every penny currently in your checking account. That's a start, and it shows good faith. If you miss that deadline, I make one phone call and you're arrested before dinner time." I kept my voice businesslike, professional, treating him like any other criminal instead of my son, because that's what he'd chosen to become when he decided to steal from me. At 11:47 a.m., my phone buzzed with a bank notification that felt like a small victory in a war I never wanted to fight. $110,000 had been deposited into my account, money that rightfully belonged to me but felt strange to receive, as if it were some kind of charity or gift. It was a start, but we were still short almost $200,000, money that had been gambled away or spent on luxuries that couldn't be recovered. Over the next week, Marcus scrambled to liquidate everything he'd bought with my stolen money, and I watched with grim satisfaction as his artificial lifestyle collapsed like the house of cards it had always been. The Tesla sold for only $38,000 to a used car dealer who knew Marcus was desperate and took advantage accordingly. The jewelry and watches, items he'd bought to impress people who didn't matter, brought in another $12,000 at various pawn shops around Portland. Designer clothes that had cost $25,000 sold for less than $3,000 at consignment shops, their value evaporating the moment they left the store. But even after liquidating everything, we were still short almost $180,000, money that had been gambled away in Las Vegas casinos or lost in cryptocurrency trades that Marcus had thought would make him rich overnight. That's when I played my final card, the one that would either teach him the most important lesson of his life or destroy our relationship forever. "Marcus, you're going to get a job. Not some cryptocurrency scheme or get-rich-quick investment, but a real job with a steady paycheck and benefits. You're going to work 40 hours a week like a normal person, and you're going to pay me back every penny you stole, with interest calculated at the current prime rate plus 2%. "Mom, I'm 35 years old. I can't just start over at the bottom of some corporate ladder. I have skills, experience in technology and finance." The whining in his voice reminded me of the teenager who thought he was too good for summer jobs while his friends were learning work ethic and responsibility. You should have thought about that before you stole from your mother and squandered everything on gambling and luxury vacations. And here's the thing, sweetheart. Until you pay me back every penny plus interest, you're cut off completely. No family dinners, no holiday visits, no birthday calls, no mother-son relationship of any kind. You want to be a thief who steals from family? Then you can be a stranger who lives with the consequences of his choices. 6 months later, I was sitting in my kitchen again, going through my mail with the same red pen and the same careful attention to detail, but everything else had changed in ways I never could have imagined. The bank statement showed a different story now, with my account balance slowly climbing back towards something resembling financial security, thanks to Marcus's monthly payments from his new job at a customer service call center downtown. He'd found work doing technical support for a software company, making $18 an hour plus overtime when available. Honest work that required him to help people solve problems instead of creating them. It was honest labor, the kind he'd been too proud to consider before his world collapsed. the kind I'd suggested numerous times over the years when he'd complained about being broke between his various failed entrepreneurial ventures. At his current payment rate, assuming he never missed a month and never lost his job, it would take him approximately 8 years to pay me back completely. 8 years of steady employment and financial responsibility that would be the longest he'd ever stuck with anything in his adult life. But something unexpected and wonderful had happened during those 6 months of enforced separation and financial reality. Marcus had changed in ways that his previous promises and apologies had never delivered. The weekly money transfers came with brief emails that weren't asking for forgiveness or making excuses or trying to manipulate me into reducing his debt. Instead, they were simple updates on his progress, reports on his work performance, mentions of financial literacy classes he was taking at Portland Community College, and references to a therapist he'd started seeing to understand why he'd made such destructive choices. His apartment was a studio in a building I'd driven past but never paid attention to, the kind of place where people live when they're starting over or learning to live within their means. He'd sold his expensive furniture, traded his designer clothes for uniforms and work shirts, learned to cook simple meals instead of eating at restaurants that cost more than my weekly grocery budget. For the first time in his adult life, he was living like someone who earned $18 an hour instead of someone who deserved luxury without working for it. Last month, he'd sent a different kind of message that made me read it 3 times before I could fully process what he was saying. "Mom, I know I can't undo what I did to you. I know 8 years of payments doesn't give you back the security I stole or the peace of mind I destroyed. But I want you to know that this job, this life, these are the first honest things I've done in years. I'm not the same person who stole from you, and I never want to be him again. Thank you for not giving up on me completely, even when I deserved it." I'd stared at that email for a long time before responding with something I hoped conveyed both my continuing disappointment and my cautious hope. Every great lesson takes time to learn, and some lessons cost more than others. Keep working, keep growing, keep becoming the man I always hoped you could be. The doorbell rang on a Sunday afternoon, interrupting my thoughts and bringing me back to the present moment. I opened it to find Marcus standing on my porch, not in an expensive suit or designer clothes, but in jeans and a polo shirt with his company logo embroidered on the chest. He looked tired but healthier somehow, cleaner in a way that had nothing to do with physical appearance and everything to do with the peace that comes from honest living. The arrogance and entitlement that had poisoned our relationship for years had been replaced by something that looked remarkably like humility, a quality I'd tried to teach him as a child but had never seen take root until now. "Hi, Mom. I brought your payment in person this month instead of transferring it electronically, and I was wondering, if it's not too much to ask, would you like to have coffee together? I know I don't deserve it after what I did, but I miss talking to you, miss being part of your life." His voice carried none of the manipulation or calculation I'd grown accustomed to over the years, just simple honesty and genuine regret. I looked at my son, really looked at him, studying his face for signs of the old Marcus, the one who'd stolen my future and nearly destroyed both our lives. The arrogance was gone, completely absent for the first time since his teenage years. The entitlement that had made him believe he deserved my money without earning it had been replaced by something that looked like genuine humility. He wasn't the man who had stolen from me, but he wasn't quite the boy I'd raised either. He was something new, something better, something that gave me hope for the first time in months. "Coffee sounds nice," I said, surprising myself with how much I meant it. "But you're buying, and we're going to Denny's, not some expensive restaurant that costs more than my weekly grocery budget." He smiled, and for the first time in months, it looked completely genuine, free of calculation or hidden agenda. "Yes, ma'am, Denny's it is, and I'll even let you order dessert if you want." As we walked to his modest used Honda Civic, a car that actually fit his income and lifestyle, I thought about all the lessons I'd learned during this devastating experience. Sometimes the hardest thing about being a teacher, whether in a classroom or in life, is knowing when to stop enabling bad behavior and start enforcing real consequences. Sometimes love means letting someone face the full weight of their choices, even when it breaks your heart to watch them struggle. Sometimes the most important lessons are the most expensive ones, both financially and emotionally. Marcus had stolen my retirement fund and nearly destroyed my financial security, but in the process of holding him accountable and demanding restitution, I'd inadvertently given him something more valuable than money, the chance to become the man I'd always hoped he could be, the opportunity to learn integrity and work ethic, and the satisfaction that comes from earning what you have instead of taking what belongs to others. The boy who had once stolen $340,000 was now proud to earn $18 an hour honestly, grateful for overtime opportunities, and committed to paying back every penny he owed. That transformation, watching him count out exact change for our coffee and tip the waitress appropriately, seeing him treat service workers with respect and kindness, knowing he was building a life based on honesty instead of deception, was worth more than any retirement account could ever be. It was the most expensive lesson either of us had ever learned, but as I watched him study the menu and calculate what he could afford, I knew it was worth every penny of the price we'd both paid.